Good morning everyone, welcome to our small footprint. My name is Nyssa, and if you're new here, we are a family of 8 who live off-grid in Australia. Today's video is another food prep planning and preservation. I think it's the second one for this supply run period. So for the October-November sort of a time span. I have been doing less actual food prep and planning, I think, and part of that's the crossover of ending up doing the ketovore with Darryl and I think that it is really impacting my drive for food, which I was a little bit concerned about. I have this tendency to just not eat if I am not eating something that I want to eat. I've mentioned it before, like in that I like my food to look nice, I like my food to taste nice, I like my food to be varied, because I don't have a particularly big appetite otherwise, and I find that if I get bored or it doesn't appeal to me, I just don't tend to eat, and I am struggling a little bit with that on the ketovore. So I'll have a chat video done up maybe Sunday and we'll discuss how we've gone. It's been 3 weeks now and things like that, and I'll discuss a few different things then. But I am struggling a little bit with the food prep planning and preservation and stuff, knowing that I won't be consuming most of it, only the kids are, which is fine. I enjoy cooking for them, of course, as well, and I still enjoy the act of food, but I'm having a little bit more trouble being creative and stuff, because Darryl and I are mostly just eating meat and the occasional veg. So, you know, and I'm trying to avoid doing some of those keto baking type things and all that sort of stuff to get a bit of a baseline, but it may be what I have to do. And even if Darryl doesn't eat that sort of stuff, but I do, and the kids can as well, then that might be the way I have to go to keep an interest in food enough to eat a decent amount of calories in a day. Because yeah, I'm just not very good at eating for the sake of eating. So it helps that I make food for Darryl and then I just make myself and I just sit down and eat it, because it's not like I'm not hungry, I'm just not hungry. It's a weird one. But anyway, this is the second part of the food prep planning and preservation. I'm just explaining why it seems a little bit different to normal. Even to me it seems a little bit normal. It's different. There's flies everywhere because it rained overnight, and so it's early morning because I didn't get this done yesterday afternoon, and I'm out here with not long after the sun's come up and flies everywhere. But anyway, so let's get into it. This is the second video, food prep, planning, preservation, all that during the 2-monthly grocery period. I had to can up the cordial that I'd made. So the cordial had been made, it ended up dragging out over a couple of days because I like to put all the fruit, so we had all the strawberry tops and the lemon juice and everything in the water, and I like to let that steep overnight so that it gets all the goodness out of the strawberry tops and things like that overnight. So I heat it all up, put a lid on it, let it sit overnight. Then the next day I strained it and I added sugar to it, a little bit more citric acid, and then brought it up to a simmer so that all the sugar could dissolve, and then I ran out of time again, so I put the lid on it and stuck it in the fridge, which is fine. There's heaps of acid in it, it's got the fruit in it, it's going to last perfectly fine. It's just inconvenient to be putting big pots of stuff in the fridge, and normally I try and get most canning projects done in a day, or you know, like the overnight and then the next day, but it just wasn't happening. So I heated up the syrup again to a simmer because we want to make sure that all the sugar is dissolved, that there's no crystallization, things like that. So we pulled it out of the fridge, stuck it on the oven, and got it heated up into a simmer again before putting it in the jars. Now I finally sorted out my lids and got some of the lids put aside for the muddy jars. So these are passata jars, and they are my favorite jars for using for cordial. If anyone's been watching for a while, they know I've been using quart jars with wide mouth lids and then putting pouring lids on them, but I actually prefer these passata jars. I just find them more convenient to use for cordial, but I just hadn't been able to find the lids for them. So I sorted out my lids and I found some lids, and that worked out well. So the only problem with these is that they're too tall for the steam canner, but that's fine because I'll just use my pressure canner as a steam canner when I'm canning these. So I did my normal, filled them all up, cleaned the rims with some white vinegar, and then put the cleaned lids on nice and firm. Some of these are second-hand lids, some of these are new ones. I use whatever I happen to have. I assess them as I take them off bottles, make sure there's no dents and all the rest of it, and then assess them again when I'm cleaning them to put them on the jars. I got my Presto out, I put a couple of quarts of water in the bottom with the rack, then got it warming up. So the bottles have warm cordial in them, so we need the canner to start off warm as well so that we get no thermal shock. Once they were of sort of an equal temp, I got all the jars in there and I put the lid on. Now, steam canning has a similar principle to water bath canning, but with less water. That's basically it. Instead of just placing the lid, we lock it, and our timing starts when the canner is shooting a steady stream of steam rather than when the water boils, but you do not put a weight on it. You just allow that steam to vent. So you need to make sure that you've got enough water in the canner that it will vent for long enough for the canning processing time, and it will vent the whole time, and that means that the inside of the canner is under pressure. It's not a pressure canner, it's not under pressure, it's full of steam. There's no air in the canner, it's only steam, and that does the same sort of process as if it was submerged underwater. So once it's steady stream of steam, you start your timer same as you would if the water was coming to a boil if you were water bath canning. So I timed that and got that going. Once the time was up, turn the canner off, let it sit for 5 minutes before cracking the lid and putting the jars on a board to sit and finish the sealing process for 24 hours. Remembering that 24 hours rest on a board is part of the sealing process, and it is important to assess the jars after that 24 hours, not as you pull them out of the canner. I also pulled the trays out of the freezer with all the strawberries and blueberries that I'd already flash frozen on them to bag up and put back into the freezer so I could reclaim those trays. So once they were empty, I just put all the berries into Ziploc bags. I have a collection of Ziploc bags that I mark and go back in the freezer once they're emptied. Fruit sometimes gets missed because the kids pull the bags out and they don't put them back, and if they have sat out at room temperature for too long, I'll try and wash them, but it doesn't always work. Whereas if I'm using them and I stick them straight back in the freezer, then I pull them straight back out to use again. So they're kept stored in the freezer, nice and sterile in there. So I put all the strawberries and the blueberries in the bags and stuck them back in the freezer. Once the trays were empty, I filled them back up. So this time it was with bananas, peeled and broken in half. I like to freeze them this way because the kids will regularly just eat half a frozen banana as a snack, as well as using them in smoothies and ice creams. Some people say, you know, freeze them in the skins or cut them into discs and stuff. I like them just in halves. The Thermomix and the Creamy are both powerful enough to handle halves, and it means that the kids just go and pull a half out of the freezer and eat it frozen as like a ice cream if they want to, as well as having the other purposes. So I just peel them, break them in half, and stack some trays with them. While I was doing the bananas, I realised I had plenty more that needed using, so I filled a few Ninja Creamy tubs. I peeled and broke up a banana and a half for each tub. Now my camera seems to have cut out just here, so I've got a little bit of gap with no film, but I broke them in half, 1.5 bananas per tub. And then I also got the boxes of mangoes to work on out and cut them up. Using the glass to get the cheeks out like I always do, putting the seeds in a bowl, the kids are going to just nom on those afterwards, and putting the flesh evenly into the creamy pints as well. Certain fruit can be processed whole, certain ones can't in the Ninja Creamy. So mango, pineapple, banana, those sorts of things are fine because they're still kind of soft when they're frozen. There is certain things that can't be. I can't think of it off the top of my head, but those sort of tropical fruits are fine to go in, and it says so in the book. Like in the book they have a tropical sorbet type thing with the fruit is not pureed up. So this was just made life simple for me. After that, I put some of the protein powders in there. These will add a little sweetness, flavour, and of course the protein as well. I did some with the mixed berry white chocolate cheesecake, some double chocolate, and some salted caramel, thinking that they would all work well with those sort of flavours. I bought a bunch of these when they had their huge sale, and we really like all the flavours. They all resemble each other, like as protein powders have a tendency to do, but they're all pretty tasty. That some of them aren't particularly low carb, I have noticed, but I haven't been using them anyway, but that was something to be aware of as well. Then I topped each one up with some coconut cream and water to the max fill line. Gave them a little bit of a mix, but it's not overly important again because the Ninja mixes quite well on its own, and then had the chore of finding lids. I have 15 of these pints, and it is amazing how often I can only find like half a dozen lids. I don't know what the kids do. They mix their ice cream, take the lids off, and like toss them. I don't know. But we end up with all the empty pints clean on the shelf and no lids, so it drives me nuts. But anyway, I found enough lids to put these into the freezer for the kids. Then they go into the freezer. It takes 24 to 48 hours depending on which freezer, where in the freezer, whether the stuff that you put in is hot. Like sometimes when I make a cooked custard that I let cool a little bit on the bench but then put in the freezer, it takes a good 48 hours before it's firm enough to mix, and even then sometimes it's soft serve. But this fruit one would freeze fairly quickly, I'd imagine, but at least 24 hours. For dinner that night, I made green chicken curry. Now, I made a keto version for Darryl and I, so I weighed out a few of the ingredients just to give myself an idea of what equals what weight, never having taken a whole lot of notice before, being that like things like broccoli have a fair few carbs in them, and so serving size of that, normally I just throw as much as I want in. So I weighed some of that just to be aware of how much was like 200 grams worth and things like that. I won't do it again, but now I've got a sort of a generalized view of how much equals that sort of weight. I used 2 pans. I cooked coconut rice for the kids as well, then started the actual curry. I split the curry paste between the two, being aware of how much coconut cream and stuff I added to Darryl and mine. So the curry paste that I'm using is fairly low carb as well per serve. So I used, I think it was 2 tablespoons for us. The rest went in the kids. And I did the kids how I normally do. I don't measure it. I add the coconut cream to the color and texture that I want and things like that. But with ours, I only used, I think it was 200 mils of coconut cream, and then I added a little bit of the Vegeta chicken stock powder, which is actually really low carb per serve, which I was grateful for, because there's some that aren't, that must have a lot of fillers in them, and put that in, and then a bit of water to make enough liquid and things like that. All the normal, plenty of chicken and green veg. So we got zucchini and broccoli and things like that. I think there might have been some beans maybe. No, that might be one of the other ones. Some fish sauce, a sprinkle of sugar in the kids, some lime juice and a drizzle of soy in the kids as well. We had the Vegeta in ours, so I didn't feel like we needed the soy salt there either. I served the kids over their coconut rice, and we just had it as like a saucy stir fry kind of thing. We have since had it with cauliflower rice, which was nice, but we don't always have cauliflower. It's not going to be something that we're constantly going to have, though I have been told that I think it was bird's eye cauliflower rice that you can buy frozen is quite nice, so I will have a look at that, because it's not rice, but it is something to help soak up some of the excess liquid in a curry like that, which is quite pleasant. The next day I was still working on bananas, so I made a batch of banana bread for the kids. It's my standard recipe. I don't appear to have the camera turned. I think I had an issue with my memory card because there seems to be stuff cut out. But anyway, I made the standard recipe for banana bread. I have a short for it, I think, so I'll try and put it in the cards when I do it. It might be on Instagram though, not on Facebook, not on YouTube. I'm not sure, but it's my standard recipe, and it's like 3 to 4 bananas and 1/3 of a cup of oil and 1/2 cup of sugar, and I think it's like 225 grams of flour and a bit of baking powder. I might put it in the description. It's a really, really basic one, and I throw all the wet in the Thermomix, and then I throw all the dry in the Thermomix, and then I stir through some chocolate chips. So this time I had some, I bought some blocks of like Cadbury cooking chocolate were half price a while back, and I bought some blocks of that, and so I just chopped up one of them into little pieces because chocolate is really expensive at the moment. Chopped it up into little pieces and stuck that in to stir through the banana bread. Filled 2 of the loaf pans, got them cooking. Banana bread's like a 50-minute cook, so just get them in the oven, and then I got plenty of time to get other stuff done. While they were cooking, I worked on the chicken thighs from Costco. So these need to be dealt with before they come up to their use-by dates. So I got the last 3 trays out and sliced them into strips like I normally do. I split them into 2 bowls and marinated one with no measurements and all the things I normally do. And the other one I went a bit lighter on anything that's going to be an issue. So like the cowboy candy has sugar in it, so I only put a tiny drizzle in the second bowl, put the normal slug that I do in the main bowl. Massaged it all through really well. Then I got 2 pans going. Started cooking the chicken off in some ghee. I find it much easier to store this chicken cooked in the freezer if it lasts longer than the few days in the fridge anyway. It gets cooked, it goes in the fridge, we use it in meals for a few days, and whatever's left then gets frozen and put into the freezer. So but I find it much easier to freeze it cooked and use it for meals later. I obviously have chicken in the freezer that's raw that I defrost and use from raw, but there's a boon to having cooked chicken in the freezer and being able to just pull it out, run it under some warm water to break it up a little bit, and then stick it straight in a pan and heat up. You want to make sure you heat it up well because you're doing it from frozen, you're quick defrosting, things like that. But in something like a pasta dish or broken up to shredded chicken for on wraps and things like that, it is so much easier to have a cooked chicken to do that with than it is to try and time defrosting chicken and cooking it and things like that. So the thighs like this I'd like to freeze cooked, and we use it for those sorts of things. I cooked it off in batches so as not to overcrowd the pan and let it stew, because we don't want too much liquid, then it'll stew instead of frying. We're after some caramelization on the outside, but still nice and juicy on the inside. Thighs are very forgiving and stay nice and moist even at high heat, I found, so we get that really nice caramelization from the sugar in the cowboy candy on the outside, and then on the inside they're still really moist, which is why this works well as a cooked frozen chicken as well, because it doesn't dry out when you reheat it. Chicken breasts this would not be something I would do with chicken breasts, because by the time you cook it, freeze it, reheat it, it would be very dry. You'd have to add a sauce or something to it. These thighs are edible, like you heat them and they're good just as is. We used some for lunch while I was cooking it off. Darryl and I had some eggs, some chicken, some halloumi, and a bit of sour cream. The kids had the chicken and eggs on wraps. For dinner that night, I had pulled out one of the boneless marinated chickens from the freezer and roasted it in the oven. The kids had a heap of rice left with just a small amount of veggies and green curry, so I poured it all into a pot and turned it into sort of a risotto. I added some nutritional yeast, a bit of stock, and heated it all through, and then added anything that needed to be added. Cut up the boneless chicken and added it to the rice. So the leftovers were like a slightly different meal the next night, but they were it was basically like a green chicken curry risotto. So there was still some chicken and veggies left from the night before, but there was more rice. I have a tendency to overcook rice and make more rice than's needed, which is fine because I use it the next day for something. But yeah, so I turned it into sort of like a risotto with extra chicken for them. I had also cooked one of the split chickens from Aldi that we had found that were fairly low carb. These are bone-in. Pros and cons. It works out like, I reckon the cost ends up being more because you get less meat because you're paying for the bones as well. But the marinade on this one was very low carb, so that's why we grabbed it. And it reminded me a little bit of eating like Nando's, like when many years ago when we lived Metro, Darryl and I used to buy Nando's and we'd buy half chickens with some chips and stuff as our meals, and they were really nice. This was sort of a similar sort of a concept. So all I did was cook that when I was cooking the kids' boneless chicken, split it in half, and we just ate half chicken each with a bit of fat on the side. I think we had some cheese or something, I'm not real sure. The next day, hamburgers were requested for dinner, so I started off by making up a batch of my hamburger bun dough, which is on the website. I'll try and put a link in the description. It's a light brioche dough, has no eggs in it though. It took me a long time to get it how I wanted it, but everyone loves it now. Darryl and I adore it, and we're not eating it anymore. That's one of those hard things about working on recipes for things for a while, which is why I might need to work on some keto style ones to keep that interest in food, even if going keto you're not supposed to. Like, the whole point was to be somewhat elimination. It was supposed to be more meat-based keto, which is, you know, carnivore with a little bit of veggies and stuff, but I may have to it may just not work for me, so we will see how we go, and we'll work from there. But anyway, I got that put aside in a container to proof, and tested out making some mayo using melted ghee as the fat instead of olive oil. Not that I'm overly concerned about consuming the small amount of olive oil we would in mayo, but I am trying new things. So I did my normal egg yolks, lemon juice, and mustard with a bit of salt. Emulsified that, and then kept emulsifying, adding a bit of ghee at a time, just like I would with the olive oil. It didn't seem to thicken up quite as much as the olive oil seems to in the actual emulsion, process. But it looked good. It was emulsified consistently, so I called it good, and I put it in the fridge. Once the dough had proofed, I shaped the buns. Now, it's quite hot lately, so yeasted doughs are well and truly rising quickly. It does make them a little more wet and slack, so I needed to use a bit more flour than normal to handle the dough because of that. And sometimes it means adding more flour to the dough initially as well. Temperature really affecting the dough, and the quicker it proofs sometimes, the less structured the dough is. So another option would be to use less yeast in it so that it was proofing a little bit slower as well, so that it doesn't lose that structure to it because it's heating up and proofing too quickly. So I measured it out and shaped it into buns and got them onto baking trays for a second proof, which in this weather only really takes, 15-30 minutes. Sort of just how long it takes to preheat the oven, basically. Once they were puffy and starting to touch, I put an egg wash on them all and sprinkled with sesame seeds. I baked for 30 odd minutes, that's about how long it takes, and this is what they looked like when they came out. Now, for hamburgers, I needed to mince up some beef, so I grabbed one of the bags from the box of beef trim that I buy from Costco, which is the pieces of beef that they use to make their mince, except I buy it in a box and I make my own mince with it when I'm ready. I cut it all into the right size pieces for the mincer and ran it through the mincer. My normal little Louvel spiel here for people who are looking for a mincer. There's an affiliate code in the description, but it's not sponsored as such, but I love my Louvel and I rave about it because I was really happy with it when I got it. It was the wattage that it uses. I used a meter on it to make sure that the wattage was low enough that I could run it on the solar without having to run a generator, which was wonderful. Their customer service is fantastic, and it grinds at about 1 kilo a minute. that's around about what it does, which is fantastic, because it goes nice and quick. Especially in the warmer months, you want it to mince as quick as possible, because as the mincer heats up, then it stops mincing the meat and starts sort of pushing it through, and you don't get that nice grain to it. So you want to keep everything cold. When it's really hot, sometimes I stick the whole mincing tube and everything into the freezer before starting to mince the meat, and I sometimes semi-freeze the meat as well to go. But it was okay this day, so I put it all in and I minced all that beef up. Once it was all minced, I used some onion powder and salt in with mince, which is all I add for my hamburger patties. I weighed the balls out to about 90 grams each, and I got Santa cast iron press, and I found the best way for me to use it in my limited space and the size of my pans. I think it'd be different if I had a big griddle, but I don't. So when I'm using it in the small pans, it was very difficult to use it in the pan as a press. So what I find the best way to do is to have 2 pieces of baking paper with a little bit of oil on them, put the balls in the middle and press it between the baking papers, peel it off and then put it in the pans. That leaves me maneuverability room, and the press doesn't get too hot and things like that. So that's how we've been doing it for that, and it works really well. You get that like smash burger type consistency from it, even though you're smashing it separately before placing it on the pan. We cook them off in the cast iron pan. You want to get the pan nice and hot. This first couple, the pan definitely wasn't hot enough. There's not as much colour on the patties as I would like, but it's fine. The kids are really very not fussy in this. I cook all the kids' patties up, so they're 2 patties each if they want. They go into the fridge if they don't eat them all. I sliced up tomato and lettuce for them, and then they have mayo, onion jam, sauce, whatever they want. I just put it all on a platter and put it on the table, and they make their own burgers at the table, adding what they want to them. Darryl's and mine, I put slices of cheese on the patties as they were cooking, and then stacked them with a bit of the ghee-based mayo on top. So bunless burgers, just like that. The mayo was lovely. It tastes very much like hollandaise. It was very lemony and creamy, and it goes pretty solid in the fridge, but as soon as it hits the food, it melts like a sauce. Quite lovely. Very nice on steak, and we've used it in a few different places. So that was another few days of food prep planning, preserving, all that sort of stuff for this month, this 2-month period. I definitely feel like I'm a little bit spending less time in the kitchen at the moment. Part of that's the heat. It's really hot. You can't do a lot, flies, all that sort of stuff. Part of that is just doing stuff for the shop as well, and figuring out what I'm going to do with the leftover Christmas stock. So like I put a photo up, I'll put a photo here of the Christmas shirt and shorts I made for the kids that I got a few extra shirts that I might offer in limited supply on the shop in the sale next week to sell off any sort of Christmas stuff that I have left for the year. And maybe I'll do a free shipping promotion or something like that. We'll see how we go. And so yeah, it's been a busy couple of weeks as well with doing all that and the heat, and we've had storms, and it's just been a bit different, and I don't know how much of that feeling different about the food is just that it's come into summer and suddenly it's hot and we're getting storms and stuff, and how much of it is the change of diet and the transfer of the way we're eating and things like that. So, because I feel like sometimes I don't film meals because Darryl and I are just having, like, we bought a leg of ham on the bone, like a Christmas ham from Costco, and there was quite a few lunches where all we did was cut off bits of ham and have it with a bit of cream cheese and things like that, and the kids had the ham on wraps, and I fried it up with some eggs or things like that, and I don't think I filmed most of that because it just felt superfluous. It didn't feel like it was anything that was worth sharing, and we're still figuring it out and figuring out what we need to do to eat to remain full, hit macros, all that sort of stuff, whilst also feeding the kids appropriately and stuff like that. So some of it is all just a bit of a learning curve that I don't think I'm filming because it doesn't feel important enough to film. And I tend to like to figure things out before I share them. I know it's annoying sometimes, but I do tend to like to get to an end point before I share it, rather than sharing it in progress where I'm just not sure what's going on or how I feel about it and things like that. So anyway, another couple of days, and hope you enjoyed watching, and I will see you guys on the next video. Bye guys.